Okay, so today we're going deep into the world of pro wrestling.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from this book called Between the Ropes by Brian Fritz and Christopher Murray.
Oh, yeah, those guys.
You know them?
I've heard of them. Yeah, they had that radio show, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Between the Ropes.
Same name as the book.
Right.
So the book goes behind the scenes of the wrestling world over the last decade or so, gives you a look at the business side of it.
Okay, so not just the storylines.
No, not just the storylines. The real stuff, the money, the personalities, the crazy decisions.
The stuff you'll see on TV?
Exactly. And what's really cool is that we're seeing this through the eyes of these two guys who are right there in the thick of it.
Yeah, it makes it more personal, right?
Absolutely. And these guys aren't just some random fans with a microphone either.
Okay.
Brian Fritz, he had a background in sports radio, even had a communications degree.
So he knows his stuff.
Oh, yeah. And he was writing about wrestling for the Orlando Sentinel even before Between the Ropes started.
Wow. So he's been around.
And then you've got Christopher Murray Schiff, huge wrestling fan, been a key part of the show since the beginning.
Behind-the-scenes guy.
Yeah, handling all the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Nice.
And we also hear about some other people who were crucial to the show, like Brian Dickerman and Larry Brannon.
Oh, yeah, Vito DiNucci?
That's the one. The foreword of the book is written by a former world champion.
Really?
Yeah, and this champ considers Between the Ropes to be their, radio home.
Wow, that says a lot.
Right. It shows you the kind of access they had, the trust they built with these wrestlers.
Must have made people feel comfortable opening up to them.
Absolutely. And that's what the book really gets at, It asks this question. What happens when the cameras stop rolling?
Yeah, what's the reality behind the show?
We see the characters, the matches, but what about the business deals, the personal struggles, the stuff that goes on behind closed doors?
The real drama.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to dig into.
I am intrigued.
So the story of how Between the Ropes even got started is pretty interesting.
Okay, how did it happen?
Back in 1997, Brian Fritz pitches this idea for a pro wrestling radio show to the program director at WQTM.
A wrestling show on sports radio.
Yeah, well, that was the problem. The program director was this guy named Dick Sheets, and he wasn't having it.
I can see why.
He thought wrestling was too fake, too over the top, didn't fit with their focus on real sports.
Yeah, that old argument.
And Brian was pretty new to radio at the time, only 24, never actually been on the air before.
So not exactly a seasoned pro.
No, but he was persistent, kept pushing the idea even though he was the new guy on the block.
Good for him.
And then in June 1998, things changed. Dick Sheets was out, and a new program director named Mark Daniels came in.
Okay.
And here's the best part. Mark Daniels was secretly a huge wrestling fan.
No way.
Swear to God. So Brian sees his chance, pitches him the show again.
What do you say?
Well, this time, Brian emphasizes that it won't just be recapping what happened on TV.
Going deeper.
Exactly. Interviews, behind-the-scenes stuff, a real in-depth look at sports entertainment.
I like.
And that's exactly what Mark Daniels said. I like it. Get me a demo tape.
That's awesome.
Right. So Brian wastes no time, brings in Brian Dickerman, who was all in from the start, huge wrestling fan.
Two Bryans.
Yeah. And they also get B. Randall involved. He was a bit skeptical at first, but jumped on board once they got the green light.
He saw the potential.
And their demo tape was super simple.
Oh.
Just the three of them talking about wrestling for 30 minutes.
Just pure passion.
No fancy production, just their genuine love for the sport shining through.
That's authentic.
And then comes Christopher Murray. Brian knew him from the early days of online wrestling fandom.
Okay.
Chris was running this email newsletter called SDNV Newsletter, had all these connections in the online community.
Perfect for promotion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brian brings him on board to handle all the online stuff, spreading the word about the show.
Smart move.
So that's the origin story of Between the Ropes. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, very cool.
All right, so now let's dive into some of the major events they covered, and we got to start with WCW.
World Championship Wrestling.
Yeah. Late 1990s, WCW was riding high.
That was a crazy time.
You had the NWO, the New World Order, running wild to Generation X and WWF, and Stone Cold Steve Austin exploding in popularity.
So much going on.
It was a boom period for wrestling, tons of money flowing in.
Exciting time to be a fan.
And it sounds like all this excitement really helped Between the Ropes take off.
Yeah, makes sense.
B. Randall even said that it was when wrestling became a regular topic of conversation on their Tuesday show that he realized they had something special.
Tapping into that energy.
But WCW's success didn't last forever.
What happened?
Even in 1998, when they were still making money, the book highlights some serious missteps in their decision-making.
Like what?
Take Bret Hart, for example.
The Hitman.
WCW brought him in, huge star established name, but they just didn't know what to do with him.
Wasted potential.
Totally, they messed up his storylines, his character, it was a mess.
That's a shame.
And then there's Goldberg.
Goldberg was a phenomenon.
He was unstoppable, but they gave away his big WCW world title win over Hulk Hogan on free TV.
Why would they do that?
Trying to beat WWF's Raw in the ratings.
Short-sighted.
Exactly. Terry Taylor, who helped develop Goldberg's character, even admits they sacrificed a huge pay-per-view event for that one Nitro win.
Not a good trade-off.
And then Starrcade, 1998, Goldberg was undefeated going into this match against Kevin Nash.
Who was also booking the shows.
Yeah, conflict of interest much.
Big time.
So Nash decides he's going to be the one to end Goldberg's streak. Scott Hall interferes, tasers Goldberg, and Nash pins him.
Oh, man. The crowd must have been furious.
The book says that was a turning point for WCW, a turn for the worse.
Killing Goldberg's mystique.
Exactly.
What about the finger poke of doom?
Oh, we got to talk about that. This was January 4, 1999. Nitro, Goldberg, and Nash were supposed to have a rematch.
Everyone was hyped.
But instead, Goldberg gets arrested. Hulk Hogan comes back from his fake presidential campaign, and then Hogan beats Nash for the title with a single finger poke.
A finger poke.
It was supposed to be an unaired reunion, but it just felt ridiculous.
Totally disrespectful to the fans.
And the ratings tell the story. The January 4th show did okay, but Raw started pulling ahead and the gap just kept widening.
People were tuning out.
Even their other show, Thunder, saw a decline. It's clear that finger poke did some serious damage.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it wasn't just bad booking decisions. There were problems behind the scenes, too.
What kind of problems?
During Eric Bischoff's time in charge, there was a lot of backstabbing people, undermining him.
Toxic environment?
Bischoff himself said it was a catastrophe from day one. No accountability, no teamwork.
Recipe for disaster.
Then Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara, they come over from WWF.
Russo, the guy with the crazy ideas.
That's him. His impact on WCW was, well, let's just say it was interesting.
Interesting, good or bad?
You decide. One Nitro episode had this concert segment that drew terrible ratings.
Oh, boy.
And then he tries to recreate the Montreal Screwjob this time with Bret Hart putting Goldberg in the sharpshooter.
Did it work?
Not really.
Yeah.
Roddy Piper was the guest referee, and he called for the bell even though Goldberg didn't tap out.
Felt forced.
Exactly. It just didn't have the same impact.
Makes sense.
Early 1999 was just pure chaos for WCW. Bret Hart and Jeff Jarrett get injured.
Ouch.
Russo strips Hart of the title books a battle royal, and then Tank Abbott wins the whole thing.
Tank Abbott, the UFC fighter.
The one and only Bill Bush, who was in charge at the time, had enough. He removed Russo and put Kevin Sullivan in charge of creative.
Another shakeup.
And then a bunch of wrestlers leave. Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, Shane Douglas Conan, they all requested their releases.
Why'd they leave?
They weren't happy with Sullivan's leadership, especially Benoit. He and Sullivan had some personal issues.
I could.
6 of those guys ended up in WWF, which was a huge blow to WCW.
Losing all that talent.
Russo and Bischoff, they come back in 2000, try to salvage things with the New Blood versus Millionaires Club storyline.
Young guys versus the veterans.
Sounds good on paper, but the execution was messy.
How so?
The younger guys often won through cheap tactics, which didn't really make them look good.
Defeats the purpose.
And then Russo books himself to win the WCW world title.
Russo.
Yep. The non-wrestler won the top title.
Uh-huh.
It was a desperate move, and the ratings kept tanking.
Oh.
Finally, AOL, Time Warner, they pulled the plug on WCW. Larry Zbyszko, who was a commentator at the time, he said it was all avoidable that the people in charge just wouldn't listen.
Sad to see it go like that.
It's a cautionary tale about bad management and creative misdirection.
Real shame.
Okay, so let's switch gears completely and talk about ECW.
Extreme Championship Wrestling.
These guys were a different breed.
Yeah. Hardcore passionate fans.
They had this incredible hardcore style, gave a platform to wrestlers who weren't getting a chance elsewhere.
The underdogs.
And they were really pushing boundaries, challenging the norms of wrestling.
But they struggle financially, right?
They did. They were a smaller regional promotion, couldn't pay their talent as much as WWF or WCW.
Tough to compete with the big guys.
Their events drew decent crowds, but not enough to make it sustainable for the wrestlers.
Always on the edge.
But ECW was also a huge opportunity for a lot of guys.
How so?
It was a place where unknown wrestlers could get noticed and established stars could reinvent themselves.
Fresh start.
Yeah. The book talks about Steve Austin and Brian Pillman. They both spent time in ECW.
Before they were big names.
Pillman even developed his loose cannon character there, which made him super hot property.
Leading to that bidding war.
Exactly. There was a real us against them mentality in ECW, especially compared to WCW.
The rebels.
But Ray Dudley even called it a wrestling revolution.
They had a loyal following.
Early 1999, Taz finally wins the ECW championship. The Public Enemy comes back, things are looking up.
But the money problems were still there.
Big-time bounced checks, delays, and pay-per-view revenue. It was a constant struggle.
Tough business.
They get a TV deal with TNN. Things seem promising for a while. Decent ratings, good pay-per-view buys. The Sandman even comes back.
It's a big name.
But then key talent starts leaving. The Dudley Boys go to WWF.
Ouch.
And then the biggest blow, the reigning ECW champion Mike Awesome walks out with the title belt and shows up on WCW Nitro. No joke. It was a disaster.
What could they even do?
Well, Paul Heyman, the mastermind behind ECW, he pulls off this crazy move.
What'd he do?
He works out a deal with WWF Taz, who was a former ECW champion, now in WWF, comes back to ECW.
To face Awesome.
You've got a WCW guy defending the ECW title against a WWF guy in an ECW ring.
That's insane.
Taz wins the title, then drops it to Tommy Dreamer.
Wild times.
But the financial problems were just too much. In Demand, the pay-per-view distributor, they weren't paying ECW the money they owed.
The final nail in the coffin.
Pretty much Paul Heyman ends up joining WWF as a commentator and then files for bankruptcy for ECW.
End of an era.
ECW may have gone under, but they left a huge mark on wrestling.
Changed the style, the attitude.
They took risks that the bigger companies wouldn't, and they had a passionate fan base that loved them for it.
They were pioneers.
All right, so now let's move on to WWF, which later became WWE.
The Attitude Era.
The Attitude Era was a huge shift for WWF.
More edgy, more adult.
Exactly, and it was all triggered by the Montreal Screwjob.
Bret Hart getting screwed.
1997 Survivor Series, Bret Hart gets betrayed out of the WWF Championship.
Shocked the world.
It changed how everyone viewed Vince McMahon.
And it gave birth to Mr. McMahon, the character.
The evil boss everyone loved to hate.
Brilliant move.
It was. And then you have Stone Cold Steve Austin rising to superstardom.
The Texas Rattlesnake.
And WWF brings in Mike Tyson to be the guest referee at WrestleMania 14.
Mike Tyson?
The boxer.
Wow, that's huge.
He was a genius move. It got mainstream media attention like crazy.
Wrestling back in the spotlight.
The confrontation between Tyson and Austin on Raw was a huge moment.
Iconic.
And then there's The Rock.
The People's Camp.
Charisma for days, catchphrases galore.
Did you smell what The Rock is cooking?
These two guys, along with a lot of other talented wrestlers, they were the driving force behind the Monday Night Wars.
WWF versus WCW.
And WWF came out on top. One of the biggest moments was when Mick Foley won his first WWF championship.
Mankind finally getting the gold.
And it happened on the same night as WCW's Finger Poke of Doom.
Talk about a contrast.
WrestleMania XV was a massive success for WWF. Broke records for attendance and revenue.
They were on a roll.
But then tragedy struck. Owen Hart died during a stunt at a pay-per-view event.
Terrible accident.
It was a tough decision, but they held a tribute show for him the next night.
A difficult time.
Russo and Ferrara, they leave WWF again.
Back to WCW.
And then Steve Austin gets a serious neck injury.
Huge blow.
Their biggest star sidelined. The Rock was also getting super popular, but they needed someone else to step up.
Who filled the void?
Triple H, he became the main villain, the champion.
Yeah.
Then you have the controversy with the Parents Television Council, the PTC.
They weren't happy with WWF's content.
Not at all. They accused them of all sorts of things, suggesting rape, attempted murder, too much sex.
Trying to get them off the air.
It put pressure on WWF's advertisers. Coca-Cola even pulled back on their sponsorship.
That's serious.
But here's the twist. The PTC eventually settled with WWF.
Really?
They issued an apology and paid them a substantial sum.
Wow, a complete turnaround.
They admitted their accusations had gone too far.
Quite a victory for WWF.
It was Mick Foley. His character kept evolving. Became more comedic with Mr. Sacco, the sock puppet.
Everyone loved Mr. Sacco.
He even agreed to work with Triple H while Austin was out.
Keeping the show going.
But not all of WWF's storylines were well received.
There were some controversial ones.
Yeah, the Katie Vick storyline was particularly bad.
That one went too far.
It involves simulated necrophilia. A lot of people were disgusted.
Definitely a low point.
But there were also new stars emerging. Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, they both won world championships.
Talented guys.
WWE also started focusing on newer talent like Batista and John Cena.
Cena with the rapping gimmick.
Yep. It was different, but it worked. Both Batista and Cena won big matches at WrestleMania 21.
That next generation.
Shawn Michaels came back after a long injury layoff. Brock Lesnar came in and became the youngest WWE champion ever.
Lesnar was a beast.
But there were still some controversial storylines.
Which ones?
The Billy and Chuck storyline with the same-sex wedding that turned out to be a fake.
People were upset about that.
And the hot lesbian action segments.
Yeah.
Those got complaints too.
Pushing the envelope a bit too much.
It was a mixed bag. Sometimes they hit the mark, sometimes they missed.
But always trying to stay ahead of the game.
All right, so after the Monday Night Wars ended and WWE was on top, a new player entered the game.
Yes.
Total non-stop action wrestling.
Trying to fill the void left by WCW and ECW.
Exactly. Jeff Jarrett was the driving force behind it.
Jarrett the wrestler.
Yeah, he saw that there are wrestling fans who wanted something different from WWE.
An alternative.
He knew he couldn't compete with WWE directly, but he wanted to create something unique, an evolution of the business.
A fresh take.
The name, Total Nonstop Action, it was a little edgy, a little attention-grabbing.
Yeah, you got people talking.
Getting funding was tough, but they managed to get investments and a loan from SunTrust Bank.
How'd they swing that?
Some of the bank executives were wrestling fans.
No way.
Seriously, it's in the book. They brought in Vince Russo for creative.
Russo again.
Yep, and that led to some clashes with Jeff's father, who had a more traditional approach.
Old school versus new school.
For their first event, they wanted to make a big splash, brought in veterans and new talent.
Showcasing the roster.
To save money, they ran 2 shows in one night and allowed wrestlers to keep working for other promotions.
Yeah, it's different.
It was a way to attract talent who weren't ready to commit to TNA exclusively.
Smart strategy.
Russo created the sports entertainment extreme angle, the SS angle.
Pushing the boundaries.
It was a heel faction that feuded with the NWA guys.
TNA had a relationship with the NWA.
Yeah, they were using the NWA World Heavyweight Championship.
Bringing back some history.
AJ Styles, he actually won the NWA title early on.
AJ Styles, TNA legend.
Getting on national TV was a big goal for TNA.
Makes sense.
They hired Brian Hughes, who used to be the president of TNN and eventually got a deal with FOX Sportsnet.
Big step up.
They downplayed the NWA connection, rebranded as TNA Wrestling and TNA Impact.
Creating their own identity.
They even moved their tapings to Universal Studios in Orlando.
More professional-like.
By 2004, TNA was growing. They brought back the Ultimate X match, signed Johnny Fairplay from Survivor, had the Raven Harris feud, AJ Styles won the NWA title again.
Lots of momentum.
Jerry had some health issues, but TNA kept going, developing its own style, a blend of old school and new school with a bit of shock value thrown in.
A unique mix.
AJ Styles signed a new contract as NWA champion, and then they got a deal with Spike TV.
Spike TV was big for wrestling.
Huge. It gave them a much wider audience.
A major achievement.
So Between the Ropes wasn't just about reporting on the big events, it was about getting to know the people involved.
The human side of wrestling.
They had some wild interview experiences.
Like what?
George the Animal Steele, he was notoriously difficult to interview.
The animal never broke character.
Not even off camera. Then there was Tom Zink.
What about him?
He showed up for an interview completely drunk.
Oh, no.
They nicknamed him Tom Drink. He was ranting and raving, but luckily his language wasn't too bad.
Dodged a bullet there.
And Jake the Snake Roberts. His interviews were always unpredictable.
The master of the DDT.
He could go from funny stories about Andre the Giant to really dark personal stuff.
A complex guy.
It just shows you the range of personalities in wrestling.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
They also made real connections with a lot of wrestlers.
Friendships.
Yeah, Jerry Lynn was a favorite, incredibly talented wrestler and a genuinely good guy.
They even got pile drive through a table by him.
That's dedication right there.
For the show.
Rob Van Dam, he promised to be their first guest.
Mr. Monday Night.
But it took 3 months and a favor from a mutual friend to actually get him on the show.
That's RVD for you.
He later asked Brian to do a shoot interview for his website.
No holds barred.
Shane Douglas, he was always good for a quote, even when he was frustrated with WCW.
The franchise.
They even got caught in the crossfire during an ECW match. Shane whipped Jerry Lynn into the guardrail, and it smashed into Brian's chin.
Ouch.
Covering wrestling was a dangerous job sometimes.
No doubt about it.
They had some strange segments on Between the Ropes, too.
Like what?
Simon Diamond, the wrestler, he did these fake Notre Dame football previews.
Why?
I have no idea. But it annoyed a lot of their listeners who just wanted to hear about wrestling.
Wrestling fans can be passionate.
Understatement of the year.
So what did they say about the state of wrestling at the time?
Well, they noticed a bit of a rebound in the business after a down period in the early 2000s, but nothing like the boom of the late 90s.
The Attitude Era was hard to top.
They emphasized that wrestlers still needed to connect with the audience, develop unique characters.
The fundamentals never change.
They even predicted that John Cena and Randy Orton would become huge stars.
And they were right.
Spot on. So Between the Ropes, it gives you this incredible insider's look at the world of pro wrestling.
A fascinating read.
It shows you the blurry line between the storylines and the real-life drama.
The business, the personalities, the controversies.
And despite all the chaos and the risks, you see the passion that these people have for wrestling.
The wrestlers, the promoters, the writers, everyone involved.
It's a captivating world.
It makes you think about what's next for wrestling.
Yeah. Where will it go from here? What will the next big evolution be?
What new challenges will they face?
Food for thought, isn't it?
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Between the Ropes.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep it real.
And keep it wrestling.